Welcome to the Bright Ideas Podcast, where we share bold insights and real stories for people leaders building cultures and companies that scale. I'm your host, Desiree B, Sharpe, keynote speaker and CEO of Color Vision Lab. We're the people and culture consulting firm helping creative businesses design smarter systems and build high-performing teams. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Michele Thornton, president at LocalFresh. If you want to scale your business without sacrificing your culture, this conversation's for you. And if you're exploring ways to elevate your people strategy, DM us the word growth on LinkedIn for a free consultation. Michele, welcome to Bright Ideas. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Desiree. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you as well. All right, so I would love for you to share with the audience how you came to lead your company, LocalFresh. Tell us about the story, the journey behind that transition.
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's been quite a journey. And my career started in marketing many years ago in Silicon Valley, and I worked, directly for companies, large and small, startups, and an agency, marketing agency down there. And moved to this area. I'm now in the Portland area. When my husband, I was always working for this agency in California while my kids were small. But when my husband passed away in 2020, he had a marketing business that he had sole ownership of. And it was at that point that I stepped in and took over. Fortunately, it wasn't, it was a business I was very familiar with. But interestingly enough, I never quite wanted to open my own agency. I was pretty happy with being a contributor at a high level. But here it was, the opportunity was here. And, one thing I would say, it was a tough first 6 months, not only with obviously losing my husband, but just getting the reins, getting everything where I could get into various accounts, where I was, had access to everything, knew the processes that were in place. And so it was probably 6 months before I could really get my hands around, okay, how do I want to manage this business and how do I want to grow it? And in what areas do I want to grow it in?
That's a very interesting, transition into a business. A lot of folks, I guess you could say there's a lot of folks who inherit businesses through different ways, but most of the people I've interviewed on this podcast have either started their companies or acquired their companies. When you were put in a position to have to decide whether you were going to take over the company, did legacy come up in your decision making at all? Did you feel like you wanted to continue your husband's legacy, or what made you say yes?
Well, there were a couple of factors. I think primarily, yes, it was a legacy thing. My husband had worked very hard at the business. The company has been around for almost 20 years. So I did feel compelled to take over, but also I knew that I could add value here. He had a little different idea of what the business was than I ended up, steering it in a slightly different direction. So there was that as well. I had an opportunity to purchase the agency I was working at down in California, but they were focused on very large clients, very, very big Silicon Valley companies. And my favorite thing was always working with small and medium businesses because you see the direct impact of everything you do. It actually, you're doing marketing that helps keep them in business and helps grow their businesses, which is something we're doing as well. So, just on a personal level, it was more satisfying to me to focus on the small and mediums. And so LocalFresh was I think a better fit for where my passions are.
How did stepping into a business kind of reshape your perspective on what it means to run a company? So thinking about that mindset shift from being in-house to now leading an organization, did you have any preconceived notions about what it was like to run a business? And if so, how did that change once you were the one running the business?
Wow. Yes, I'm sure I could come up with a huge long list. I think as far as the client management and running of the projects and programs and things we have, and getting our team uh, trained up to a little bit higher level in doing more B2B versus B2C and medical, I think those were challenges I was prepared for. But running the business, the financials, all of that, just running all of the functional stuff behind the scenes was never my strong suit. I didn't have direct experience doing it. I've learned a whole lot in 5 years. And it's definitely been a learning curve, but I think I'm in a much better position now there than I was. And, difficult because my main advisor on those things was always my husband. So, because he was much more adept at that. He was definitely more of a financial type of brain, and so that was definitely challenging at first few years.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
Mhm,
I don't know if anyone is ever really fully ready to run a business.
mhm,
I mean,
mhm,
you could feel like you have control over things for a time, a period of time, whether it's 6 months, 3 years, 5 years, but eventually whatever you're doing is going to stop working, and you have
mhm,
to reinvent yourself. You got to do something different, reposition the business because that's just what it takes to stay, stay profitable, stay relevant. One of the interesting parts of your story that I really wanted to highlight or lessons learned from inheriting a business after your husband passed is
mhm,
the succession planning piece of it, which I think is a big part of ownership that a lot of SMBs in particular overlook. We don't make a point to build systems, build out our back end, like even on the personal side, set up trusts and
mhm,
wills and things like that, which are so important, especially if you have aspirations to sell your business one day. If you could go back in time and give your husband a piece of advice earlier in his early days in the business to help with that transition, what would some pieces of advice? What would you tell him to better prepare someone else, even if it
mhm.
weren't you, to take over the company?
Well, there's a lot there. I think first of all, having more documented processes. He had been running the business. He had just purchased out a business partner. So in his defense, he'd only had the business solely for a couple of months when everything happened. So there wasn't a whole lot of time for him to do an in-depth succession plan. But I mean, it starts with really basic things like how do you get into all the accounts? How do you calculate your margins and your projections? And I had to sort of absorb that from what documents, we're online, and so everything, we everything is centrally located. We're Google Docs. We've been virtual from the start, so I had access to a lot, but still, it's putting into place, some of the processes in a way that is easy for somebody else to step in and go, okay, this is how they've been doing XYZ. So let's keep doing that while we look at other ways, see if other ways are more effective. So.
What changes have you made, since you stepped into the business, having had that tough transition, at the onset of you becoming
Mhm.
the president? What have you done differently to prepare for the next phase in the business when you decide to either sell or step away?
Yeah. So, a bunch of things. I have expanded the markets that we serve and become more focused on two of our strongest vertical areas, industries. Added in manufacturing for us, which in the Pacific Northwest is a fairly important, a lot of aerospace and things like that up here. So we had a few clients in that area already, but we hadn't focused on it as a market and did the same to expand our dental. We work with a lot of dentists and a lot of medical practices. And, we're looking at a few others now, verticals to really focus in and message to, um, because it was very general before. The other thing that we've done is add more sophisticated services. The company started with really building websites and optimizing for local SEO and all of that, and we still do all of that. But we have added, much more in the way of demand gen programs, nurturing, lead tracking, those sorts of things to round out our portfolio. And then as far as leadership goes, I have a few key individuals that, are really helping run the business. And so my focus for the last few years, once I sort of had the reins in hand and wasn't going to fall off the horse, I started really pulling myself as much as possible out of the day to day deliverables and the hands on, delivery of things, at least after the client has been sort of onboarded. And that has proven to free me up for looking ahead, being able to plan ahead.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that it's great that, you've been really just focusing on the vision, and
Mhm,
following the trends to make sure that the business is positioned to do well. And that actually kind of leads me into my next question. Many small businesses, particularly in manufacturing, you talked about that space being one of your core verticals. A
mhm.
lot of SMBs have faced uncertainty, specifically with the tariffs and shifting demand. I would say even beyond that, just this year alone, there have been so many fluctuations in the economy that have affected businesses of all sizes, all industries and sectors. For you, how have you adapted your strategy to navigate these cycles, kind of these ebbs and flows in the economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think like everybody, we were hit in January with just a sea change that changed everything. Some of it okay, some of it not, but the uncertainty factor alone, has definitely made people cautious, about budgeting and bringing in third parties like us, especially in manufacturing because it's been so turbulent. And really, the way we've been managing it is to focus on some of our other core areas a little bit more, medical, dental, consumer. And so those areas have more stability right now. Although we are seeing definitely a turnaround in manufacturing. People are starting to work on projects again that they had kind of shelved in January, February, March. Those were those were very quiet months for manufacturing as everybody was just kind of holding their breath and waiting. And now, even though things aren't really resolved, people have to move ahead in their businesses, so they are starting to do that. So, but definitely challenging as a leader, but focusing on some of our core business that is not so affected has been working pretty well for us.
Yeah, I've been hearing that from some other owners I've spoken to as well, and doubling down on where there's opportunity, but then also wanting to keep those relationships warm, in
Mhm.
more of your legacy verticals. It's a slippery slope because the business still needs to survive while there's these, ebbs and flows. You've emphasized that in marketing, your services could get commoditized, right? Like treated as a luxury, which I've heard also quite a bit, especially in hard times. What shifts are you seeing in how small and medium businesses are valuing marketing today? So when we think about all the trends impacting the space, what would you say their general outlook on marketing is?
I think, well, it's different depending on the sector. For example, the dental medical independent practices have always been very tuned into marketing, whether it's, pre digital or early digital, up to today. So they get it for the most part. Manufacturing has been a little more challenging just because, it's shifting quickly because a lot of smaller manufacturers who have been family owned for many, many years. They've done business the old school way, which is handshake and phone calls and all of that, and it's worked for them for 40 or 50 years. It doesn't work now for them. And a lot of times, the younger generation is taking over, whether it's a legacy, whether it's family coming in, or whether it's, somebody from the outside purchasing the company. And they understand, they get it. They're in a different generation. And so they understand that they have to have a digital presence. So selling on our part has gotten quite a bit easier over the last few years because that is happening increasingly. And I think some of this uncertainty is maybe driving older owners of these businesses to say, "Okay, I'm done. Let's turn it over. this is this is too, you know, for the very small companies. It gets to be pretty challenging." So,
I could definitely see that. One of the interesting things about Local Fresh that you've shared with me is that you've had your team on board with you for a pretty long time.
mhm,
I think you mentioned that some of the team members you have been with you for 20 years, which is it's rare to say the least, right?
mm,
So,
mm.
what do you think has created that level of loyalty and longevity? What strategies or what approach did you take to culture building your own culture that makes your folks so loyal to you?
Well, I can speak to the foundation of what my husband's philosophy was, hire good people and empower them to do their jobs. Get out of their way. let them make decisions. They can take ownership of the good and the bad. But, and so he always had that philosophy. So he hired people who liked to work that way. Um, and I think that was a great foundation. When I came in, for me, it was very much about transparency, really, because and my husband was not this way either. But I know I don't know everything. I know there's experts on my team, and not just in, for example, SEO and the details of Google advertising, right? But on the technical side, but also just problem solving. I have a wealth of knowledge on my team, and so, but people on a team don't tend to share that if they don't feel, I guess, valued, listened to. If you, as a leader, act like you know everything and you don't need any advice from anybody, this is what we're doing and how we're going to do it. I mean, there are times for that, but you know, I think being transparent, you can't get that knowledge and experience from people if you're not transparent with what the goals of the business are, what the challenges are. A lot of companies don't want to talk about the challenges because it's not fun, right? But all businesses have challenges. And it's amazing how everybody on our team has stepped up to help address those challenges. So they see it as their business too, in many ways. Telling them in January, look, it's slow right now. And it's going to be slow for a few months. And I support you guys. All of our people are hourly, which is also unusual, but allows us as a business owner, to be flexible in how we run the business. Everyone on the team has liked that. When times are good, they like it. And when times are bad, they've dealt with it. But I've always given them a heads up on, hey, I know you're not using all your utilizable hours right now. And that will change. Here's where we're at. And then just asking for their help and cooperation and appreciate them. So it's worked for us. And I think the other thing is kind of open communication. I've always told people that have worked for me, whether here or other places, I will never fire you for making a mistake. Tell me what happens and we will solve it. And it only becomes an issue if it's the same mistake over and over, um, or if it's a lack of motivation or you know ownership. Because if you ask somebody on a team to own their projects and then punish them for making a mistake, that's counterproductive, right? So they're going to, that's just not going to encourage them to say, okay, I think this is not the right thing to do. And how do we fix this? And because everyone's learning, no matter how long you've been doing this. I've been doing this for a long time, and mistakes still happen. It does. So I think keeping that open to, coaching your team when those things happen, staying calm, not flying off the handle, just saying, okay, this isn't great, but let's see what we can do now. And 9 times out of 10, my team has better ideas than I do on on how to make it right. And we actually we have lost clients. I mean, everybody loses clients for one reason or another. We've lost a few clients, not for, I mean, for reasons that were really preventable on our part. And when that happens, we have a debrief, kind of a, let's talk about what's going on here. And interestingly, this year alone, I think we've gotten back 3 clients that left. And I always say this is partly because we have to set the right expectations for the results, remind them of what those expectations are so that they're not expecting something different than we're prepared to deliver. And that is usually where the disconnect will happen. They'll have a different idea of what the results are going to be of a campaign or anything like that. Sometimes it's just miscommunications and things like that. It happens. But we've had 3 people come back this year, and that's not unusual for us. But I'll look over the years. It's like, okay, well, they'll be back. So because
Amazing.
we keep a lot of clients for long time on retainers.
So much goodness in that. Honestly, I heard transparency a lot.
Mhm.
Transparency with the clients, with the team, managing expectations. I also appreciated your comments around people not wanting to talk about the ugly parts of being in business and the challenges that they have in their companies. I see a lot of conversation online about that. People, I think more folks are feeling called to share the good, the bad, and the ugly of
Mhm.
of growing a company, because these are just unprecedented times. And when you peel back the curtain on a lot of people's businesses, there's like pretty big issues going on behind the scenes. And
Mhm.
this is one of the reasons why, or the main reason why I started the podcast, is because I just got so sick and tired of the vanity metrics of, the posts on LinkedIn about everything just being peachy and perfect, and it just creates this unrealistic image um that is not healthy to other, to your peers, to other leaders. And so I always wanted this podcast to just be an authentic, transparent voice in the business world around what it really takes to roll up your sleeves and build something meaningful from the ground up, or wherever you came into the story.
Mhm.
It takes a lot of grit and a lot of sacrifice and resilience. So,
Yeah.
you sharing that, I think, humanizes the journey a lot more.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I came up in the high-tech startup boom, and it was all smoke and mirrors, right? It was all, "Oh, we've got this great space with all this money we're spending on furniture," and, you know, um, and things like that, from our VC overabundance of funding, and I worked for more than a few who didn't really have there wasn't a there. You know? You realized, "Oh, there isn't really a fully formed product here." And so, I spent enough time doing that it was just I was kinda over it as far as that goes. And, it's like, let's be real. This is when you're an entrepreneur, it is tough. It can be super challenging. The rewards are great, but, the downside is also great, and it affects you personally. And one thing I've really tried to do, I can't say I'm 100% successful, but is take my ego out of it and try not to think of the business as my personal success or failure. That's hard to do when you're an entrepreneur because it is really you at the end of the day. um, and it's hard not to internalize that as a personal thing. But I think it's doable, and that's kind of my main focus is to find the fun in it and let it go when it's feels like it's beating me up a little bit.
Can totally relate. One of the things that I really love to talk about on this podcast is the human side of leadership. I don't want to just talk about growth strategies and, best practices. I want to hear more about the human behind the business, which is why we've talked, more about your journey and with
Mhm.
LocalFresh. But I want to talk a little bit more about. I'm careful to use the word balance because I'm in a season of life right now where balance truly doesn't exist for me. There's so much newness, and I'm struggling to figure out how to navigate it all at the same time, or at
Yeah,
least attempt to. So,
yeah.
for you, what has been the hardest personal adjustments that you've had to make in navigating health, leadership, sustaining the business, all
Mhm.
these things that feel like a lot at once? And how has that changed the way you lead today?
That's a great question, and kind of a very deep one as well, but an excellent question because, yeah, I mean, coming into the business after a tragedy, a personal tragedy, is difficult, and I think I spent the first 2.5, 3 years really just grinding as hard as I could, you know? Working myself till I was sick, um, you know, really neglecting my health and the rest of my life, which basically stopped existing, during that time. And in some ways that was bad. In some ways it was also good, because I had purpose and I could focus on that instead of some of the other things I was dealing with. But that is challenging. And so I realized after doing that for a few years that was not sustainable. It wasn't a good way to live. It wasn't a good way to feel. And, just physically, I was exhausted. And so I started letting go a bit. And that's counterintuitive. I think when you're an entrepreneur, you feel like you got to be on 24/7. And, interestingly, I was the reluctant entrepreneur. And this is precisely the reason I never started my own business. So I feel like it's almost like the powers that be have said, no, you are going to learn to do this. Because my father was an entrepreneur. My husband was an entrepreneur. They both worked themselves to death, literally, just worked all the time, lost perspective on the importance of the business versus themselves, right? And their own mental health and physical health. I grew up in New England. That's a very hardworking sort of ethic community. And it's like you strap in and you do whatever it takes. And at some point, you have to say, no, no, I'm going to let some stuff go. And that has actually opened up more brain space for me to be able to actually be more effective. And, it's not as exhausting. So I have that energy to put into the creative side of my business. So yeah, that's really been the journey. I don't know if you're familiar with Columbia Sportswear,
Yes, I am.
big company. And
Yeah.
I think one of the things early on that really impacted me was Gert Boyle, her story. She was the woman who ran Columbia, but she took it over from her husband when he died. She had never worked in the business. He passed away unexpectedly. She had kids. She took over, and she did a lot of the things that I've been trying to do, which is listening to good advisors, making tough decisions, um, digging in when it seems impossible. And she really, between her and her son, they restructured that company and made it the success it is today. It wasn't doing well. So she's been my sort of little angel on my shoulder. She used to live not far from me. I never met her, but she did a whole campaign. It was a Wyden and Kennedy campaign for Columbia where she had the tattoo that said "One Tough Mother," and that's sort of been my internal motto is that I can do this. Gert did it, and it was a whole different era when she did it, and that's been helpful as well.
Wow, you really spoke to me on a deep level. You said letting go.
Mm,
That just, whew, it hit me kind of deep because I am in a season of surrender, total surrender. I have also gotten to the now, let me take a step back. I've had many seasons in business, many highs, many lows. And when I hit the lows and it starts to feel like I'm going up against the grain, things aren't really working. My creativity is blocked. Back in the busy work, not really moving the needle. And it just doesn't feel like there's any synergy. There's no flow. I'm not in a flow state.
mhm,
That's always like a sign that I need to take a step back and I need to just stop obsessing over things and trust that I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ, but trust that God is working things out
mhm,
exactly the way they're supposed to be.
mhm,
And there's just a certain level of peace that comes with relinquishing control and allowing things to play out. But it's so contrary. It's like contrarian thinking. It's completely
mhm,
anti what people tell you in the business world. I think folks are so slowly starting to recover from the grind and hustle culture that
mhm.
has driven so many people into, broken down bodies and mental health issues and all kinds of issues. But
Yep.
I think that we need more conversations like this of people saying,
Mhm,
"Look, I'm just in a season where I'm slowing down and I'm just letting things flow." Right?
mhm.
I love that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think to fight it too hard just is counterproductive. Um, and there is a time for that, and there's certainly a time for knuckling down and getting the job done and doing what you need to do. But it does take some mental discipline to say, I'm not dealing with this. I'm gonna, I'm
Yep.
gonna just let that be what it is right now and not try to just keep shouldering that boulder up the hill and to have it roll back down. I'm gonna let it be what it is, and it feels better and it works better. It really does. But it is very contrary to the way Americans have been taught. It's like you grind, 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 and then if it's not working, you grind harder. And you know, and
Right.
it's like, okay, well, that hasn't worked well for anyone I know. Um, so I'm going to do it differently. And it took me a few years to get to that realization that this is what I'm really learning here.
Mm. Good for you. Good for you,
Yeah.
Michele. That's amazing. This has
Thanks.
been an incredible conversation. It's so inspiring. And there's just so many lessons to be taken away from this chat that we're having. I want to wrap up the conversation by having you share your one bright idea with the audience. A bright idea could be a mindset shift, a tool, a strategy, a podcast, a book, something that's really making a positive difference for you or your business. What would that one bright idea be?
Well, I talked about a few of them already, and I think it's the transparency factor and calling on your team to step up and help you achieve the company's goals. I mean, to me, that is, it empowers them, makes them feel like they directly contribute to the success, and it takes some of the pressure off an owner, a business owner, you know. So that's been a big piece of it.
Awesome. Transparency. There you have it, folks. Michele, if there's someone in the audience who wants to learn more about Local Fresh, where can they find you?
Well, they can find us, of course, on the web. LocalFresh, localfresh.com is the best way to check us out and see what kind of work we've done and what we can do for future clients.
Amazing. And we will be sure to drop that information, all the links in the show notes. Michele, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing your story and your wisdom. This was a fantastic chat.
Thank you. I've had a great time.
Thanks for tuning in to Bright Ideas. If today's episode gave you something to think about, here's your next step. DM me the word growth on LinkedIn to start a conversation about how we can help you scale smarter. And if you're a founder, CEO, or senior talent leader with a story to share, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out about joining me on a future episode. And if you don't want to miss future conversations, be sure to follow the show, leave a quick rating, and download your favorite episodes to take them on the go. Your support helps more leaders discover bright ideas. Until next time, be bold, be resilient, be sharp. I'm Desiree B. Sharpe.